Happy New Year! You have survived 2020. Congratulations. The next challenge is, will you survive 2021? Who knows what this year may bring, but I hope you all were able to have a happy new year. Today we're going to be in Luke chapter 2, and we're going to be reading about really the only story of Jesus' childhood that we know of. We know the Christmas story, and then we know when his ministry starts beginning. And there's kind of this huge, around 30-year gap where we really don't know anything about Jesus and his life, except for this story in Luke chapter 2, where he's found in the temple. And of course, that begs the question for anybody listening, have you ever lost someone before? I know many times parents are terrified of losing their kids, and they all have stories about a time when they thought they may have lost their child. I know my mom has told a story recently about how when I was around 4 or 5 years old, there was a family in the neighborhood who would usually babysit for me. And apparently my mom was like on the phone talking about how she was going to drop me off before she went, did shopping or whatever. And so I was like, oh, okay. So apparently I got on my bike all by myself and rode my bike there. And my mother had no idea. So she was kind of freaking out about that a little bit. And fortunately she got in her car and saw my bike in the yard or whatever. So she walked up and saw me and was quite relieved I did not just disappear, so that I was safe. So that's an interesting story. I know Brooke, my girlfriend, has a nephew named Boyd who has run off many a times, and it's always funny trying to catch him. He's not even 2 yet, but he just loves to run. And so it's a challenging thing for a parent, the fear of losing their child, and that's kind of the story we are reading today in Luke chapter 2. So starting in verse 41, it says, "Now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover, and when he was 12 years old, they went up according to the custom. And when the feast was ended, as they were returning, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents did not know it, but supposing him to be in the group, they went a day's journey, but then they began to search for him among their relatives and acquaintances. And when they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem, searching for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. All who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. And when his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, 'Son, why have you treated us so? Behold, your father and I have been searching for you in great distress.' And he said to them, 'Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my father's house?' And they did not understand the saying that he spoke to them. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was submissive to them. And his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man." So what a crazy story there about how Mary and Joseph lost the Messiah. And I can only imagine how terrifying that must have been. Not only losing your child, but knowing that this was a child that God had told them was going to save their people. So that is that will cause you to start getting some gray hairs a little bit earlier there. So a couple of things from the story that I wanted us to take from. First is this was during the Passover, the time when Israel celebrated God delivering Israel out of bondage from Egypt. And they are looking, Israel currently, during this time period, for a Messiah to save them from Roman bondage. So you see the link there between Jesus and Moses. And you see it a lot during the Christmas story. And it says he was 12 years old, which is about the age of some of the kids in the youth group right now. So that's kind of interesting. And it says, "And after those days were over, as they were returning, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it." And as we already read, we know that Jesus stayed in the temple. And it's like, how many kids are excited about coming to church, excited about getting to know God? And so that is what we need to encourage in our young ones, and even in our lives. Like, are you longing to stay in church? Are you saddened almost when church is over because you have to leave? You have to leave God's house in a way. Jesus wanted to stay. And so Mary and Joseph, assuming that they're in the travel party, I'm sure that this was customary, that they just did what every parent did during this time. And it says they did not find him. It says they returned it says they went a day's journey, and it says after 3 days they found him in the temple. So there's a little discussion like, does this 3 days mean like they traveled a day, they traveled back a day, and then looked for a day? Or did they travel a day, come back, looked for 3 days? So, I don't know. Not sure. I'm not going to say one way or the other because I'm not going to claim that I know all this knowledge or whatever. But I do find it interesting that they seem to have searched for a long time, at least for 1 day, if not for 3. They didn't look in the temple first. Where do you think they looked at first? I'm sure they were thinking the worst, and they may have been looking in the slums and the gutters, like almost looking for their son's body, like lying on the side of the road. They didn't assume the best, they assumed the worst. And so that's another reminder for us as Christians is we have to have hope and we have to long for the best. Now that opens us up for disappointment a lot, and it can be easy to let our disappointment get the best of us to where we assume the worst in things. But we need to make sure that we trust in God, because that's what ultimately, when we start assuming the worst, we're actually doubting God. So we need to assume that God is in control and hope for that He is taking care of everything. And so Jesus is in the temple, and everybody was astonished by His understanding and His answers. And when His parents saw Him, they were astonished, and His mother said to Him, "Son, why have you treated us like this?" And Mary's like, "Jesus, why have you done this to me? Have you almost gave me a heart attack?" And it's like, your father and I have been anxiously searching for you. And again, they looked for Him everywhere but the temple, apparently. And Mary, I'm sure, and Joseph were not used to Jesus causing issues because, again, He never did any sin, which means He probably was one of the simpler kids to raise. But here, He caused His parents great fear. And then Jesus' response, "Why are you searching for me? Didn't you know that it was necessary for me to be in my Father's house?" And as Christians, people shouldn't be amazed by the fact that we want to go to church or that we're at church. People should assume that is our desire and our want is to be with other believers. And so that's a good lesson for us there as well. It says, Mary and Joseph, they did not understand what He said to them. And that's okay. Sometimes we're not going to understand. We're not going to fully get why God acts the way He does. And it says He went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. Because obviously if He was not obedient to them, that would have been a sin. And so He was obedient. His mother kept all these things in her heart. This is the second time we've heard this. We've heard this with the shepherds as well. Mary storing all these things. And it says, and Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and favor with God and with people. And so this is important. A lot of times people wonder, like, well, did Jesus just know everything? Well, it says Jesus increased in wisdom and stature. So even though He was the Son of God, I think as a child, He probably did have to learn math, arithmetic, whatever, had to go to school and use his brain and actually had to remember things and was a hard worker. He wasn't lazy. Jesus wasn't lazy. He was the Son of God who had the power to know everything, but He wasn't lazy. He increased in wisdom and in stature, in favor with God and with people. So a lot of times when we read the Gospels, we see Jesus with conflict, especially with religious leaders. But here we see Jesus gaining favor with people. So because at this point his ministry hadn't started, so He wasn't really a threat to anybody, He was gaining favor with people. And it's important for us as Christians to gain favor, whether that's at work or at home, like wherever, just with your friends group, gaining favor with people, being a person that is growing in wisdom, who other people just enjoy being around. Just be a person that people want to be around. That way, as Christians, when that conflict does happen, because we are Christians, we are at war against the principalities of the air and against darkness. So when that does happen, though, people will respect us. They've had that favor, therefore they're more willing to listen. So it's important for us to grow in favor as much as we can, in line with God's word, so that we can then be a positive testimony to people. So that's the fun story here about how Jesus got left behind. He intentionally stayed behind, and a good reminder for us to just trust in God. Don't assume the worst all the time. Have hope. Have that value for God's house like Jesus did. And we must always continue to want to grow in wisdom and in favor in the sight of both God and man. So that is today's lesson. I'll say a prayer and we'll be dismissed. Dear Lord, thank you for this lesson for 2021. Lord, help this be a springboard for us as we enter into this new year, to be people who want to grow in wisdom and in favor of both you and man. Help us to stay focused on your word. Lord, help us value being in your presence and being in your house. Lord, help us not to doubt you. Help us to trust in you. And again, help us see hope where others may not. In your name I pray. Amen.